The streets were quiet, almost eerily so, when suddenly screeching tires, a deafening crash, and the gut-wrenching sound of metal twisting against metal. Keanu's instincts kicked in before his mind could catch up. A collision, a bad one. Two cars had crumpled together at an intersection, steam hissing from shattered radiators, headlights flickering in the dark. Without hesitation, he slammed on the brakes and pulled over, heart pounding. Smoke billowed from the wreckage, and through the cracked windshields, he saw movement, shadows struggling inside. Then he heard it. The cry of a child. Keanu reached the wreckage within seconds. The front end of a blue sedan was crumpled beyond recognition, smoke curling from beneath the hood. The second car, a silver SUV, had flipped onto its side, the driver's door crushed against the pavement. Inside, he could see movement, someone trapped. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and like the video so you don't miss tomorrow's video. The cries of children pierced the night, their voices muffled by twisted metal and shattered glass. Keanu's pulse quickened. He dropped to his knees beside the sedan, peering into the backseat where he spotted two small figures, a boy and a girl, no older than 10, pinned under the collapsed roof. "Hey, kids, can you hear me?" His voice was calm but urgent. The boy coughed, eyes wide with terror, while the girl whimpered, clutching her brother's arm. We can't move," the boy rasped. Keanu's jaw tightened. "I'm getting you out." The front passenger seat had been pushed back from the impact, trapping the children in a cage of wreckage. The parents, both unconscious, were slumped forward, the father's head resting against the deflated airbag while the mother's arm hung limply at her side. Keanu reached through the shattered window, fingers brushing against the father's neck. A pulse. Weak, but there. A groan came from the SUV. Someone else was alive. Keanu had no time to think. Every second counted. He grabbed the door handle, but it was jammed. Gritting his teeth, he braced himself and pulled with all his strength. The metal groaned but refused to budge. He needed something stronger. His eyes darted to the ground, searching. Then he saw it. A crowbar lay near a discarded toolbox, likely thrown from one of the vehicles during the crash. Snatching it up, he wedged the iron bar between the door and the bent frame. With a grunt, he forced it open inch by inch until he could slip his arm inside. The acrid stench of gasoline filled his nostrils. He had to move fast. "All right, buddy, I'm going to get you out first," he told the boy. "I need you to take a deep breath and stay as still as you can." The boy nodded, eyes brimming with fear. Keanu gripped the edge of the twisted metal, ignoring the way it sliced into his palms, and pulled. The boy cried out as the weight shifted, but after a final, desperate heave, Keanu managed to free him. "One down," he muttered. Setting the boy a safe distance away, he turned back. The girl was still trapped, pinned under her mother's unconscious body. He moved quickly, lifting the woman just enough to slide the girl free. Keanu scooped her up, carrying her away from the wreckage. The boy clung to his sister as Keanu knelt beside them. "Are you hurt anywhere?" he asked, scanning them for injuries. I don't know," the boy stammered, coughing on the smoke. "Mom and Dad, they won't wake up." Keanu's throat tightened. "I'm going to help them. You two stay here, all right?" He turned back toward the car, just as flames erupted from the hood. The fire spread fast, licking hungrily at the shattered windshield. Keanu's heart pounded. If the gas tank ignited, the entire vehicle would go up in seconds. But the parents were still inside. Gritting his teeth, he surged forward. The heat was unbearable, but he pushed on, yanking open the driver's door. The father stirred, moaning weakly. Keanu grabbed him under the arms and dragged him out, staggering under the man's weight. As soon as he was clear, Keanu sprinted back. The flames were spreading. The mother. He had to get to her. Smoke stung his eyes as he reached in, unbuckling her seatbelt. She was unconscious, dead weight against him as he tried to pull her free. The fire crackled, embers floating through the night air. His muscles burned with exhaustion, but he refused to stop. With one final, desperate pull, Keanu dragged the woman out just as the flames reached the dashboard. The moment he laid her down beside her family, the sedan exploded. A deafening roar filled the air as the car was consumed in a ball of fire, sending a shockwave through the street. Keanu shielded the children, covering them with his body as the heat rolled over them. Keanu sat back on his heels, his chest rising and falling with deep, controlled breaths. The heat from the fire still burned against his skin, and the acrid scent of gasoline and scorched metal clung to the air. The children clung to each other, their small bodies trembling from shock. In the distance, red and blue lights cut through the night, sirens wailing as paramedics and firefighters rushed toward them. Keanu wiped the soot from his face, his hands still shaking from adrenaline. "You're safe now," he murmured, looking at the children. The boy, still in shock, nodded. The girl, however, broke away from her brother and threw her arms around Keanu's neck, sobbing into his shoulder. He hesitated, caught off guard, then gently placed a reassuring hand on her back. "You saved us," she whispered between sobs. Firefighters swarmed the burning wreck, blasting it with high-powered hoses as paramedics rushed to the parents. The father stirred first, groaning in pain as an EMT checked his vitals. The mother was still unconscious, but her pulse was steady. "Sir, are you injured?" A paramedic knelt in front of Keanu, scanning him for burns or cuts. "I'm fine," Keanu assured him, though his hands ached, his arms stung where metal had scraped them, and his lungs still burned from the smoke. He wasn't fine, but the kids were, and that was all that mattered. "Did you?" The paramedic's eyes widened as he got a good look at Keanu. Recognition dawned. "Wait, are you?" Keanu shook his head slightly, signaling the man to keep quiet. Now wasn't the time. Instead of answering, he stood and walked toward the father, who was now conscious enough to realize what had happened. His eyes flickered open, dazed, confused. "My kids, my wife," his voice was hoarse. "They're okay," Keanu assured him. "They're right here." The father turned his head, his gaze landing on his son and daughter. Tears filled his eyes as he weakly reached for them. The boy immediately grabbed his father's hand, clinging to it as if afraid he would disappear. Keanu stepped back, giving them space. "Sir," the same paramedic said, "you should go to the hospital. You inhaled a lot of smoke, and your hands." "I'm all right," Keanu said, but even as he spoke, dizziness washed over him. The world tilted slightly. He barely had time to steady himself before another paramedic grabbed his arm. "Sir, you're going with us." No arguments. Keanu let out a slow breath. He wanted to argue he hated hospitals, but the truth was he had pushed his body to its limit. If he didn't let them check him out, he might collapse right there. With a reluctant nod, he allowed the paramedics to guide him to an ambulance. The hospital was quiet except for the distant beeping of monitors and the muffled voices of nurses moving through the halls. Keanu sat on the edge of a hospital bed, a bandage wrapped around his left hand where the metal had cut him. Smoke inhalation, minor burns, exhaustion. The doctors had listed off his injuries, but nothing serious. He was lucky. A soft knock at the door broke his thoughts. Before he could answer, the door creaked open, and the two children stepped inside. Keanu straightened in surprise. "Hey, what are you doing here?" The boy hesitated before stepping forward. "We wanted to see you." The girl nodded. "Mom and Dad are still asleep, but the doctors said they're going to be okay." Keanu smiled. "That's great news." The boy shifted on his feet, then reached into his pocket and pulled out something small and shiny. He held it out to Keanu. "This is my lucky coin," he said. "I've had it since I was little. It always made me feel safe." Keanu looked at the coin, then at the boy's earnest expression. The child took a deep breath. "You saved our lives, so I want you to have it." Keanu hesitated. "I can't take that, buddy. It's yours." The boy's eyes burned with determination. "Please. It's my way of saying thank you." "You don't have to thank me," he said gently. "I just did what I hope anyone would do." The boy shook his head. No one else stopped. "Only you did." That truth hit Keanu harder than he expected. Dozens of cars must have driven past, headlights illuminating the accident before fading into the distance. People might have called 911, but no one else had rushed into the wreckage. No one else had pulled them from the flames. Keanu sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "I was just in the right place at the right time," he said. The girl tilted her head. "Does that mean you're our guardian angel now?" Keanu let out a small laugh. "I don't know about that, kiddo, but I'll always be here if you need me." Before they could respond, the hospital doors swung open, and a doctor entered, followed by a nurse. "You two shouldn't be here too long," the nurse said, smiling at the children. "Your parents are awake now. They've been asking for you." The kids' faces lit up. The boy turned back to Keanu. "Will we see you again?" Keanu didn't hesitate. "Of course." The girl beamed, then, without warning, threw her arms around him. Keanu stiffened in surprise before gently patting her back. The boy followed, hesitating for only a second before hugging Keanu, too. For a moment, he just sat there, arms around the two children he had saved. Then, they stepped back and ran off to see their parents. Keanu watched them go, something heavy settling in his chest. An hour later, Keanu stepped out of his hospital room, bandaged but feeling stronger. He made his way down the hallway toward the reception desk, where a nurse sat typing on a computer. "Hey," he said, lowering his voice. "The family from the car accident? Can I cover their hospital bills?" The nurse blinked in surprise. "I'm sorry, sir. Are you?" Keanu leaned in slightly. "I'd like to remain anonymous." Recognition flickered in her eyes. I see." She glanced at her screen. Their insurance should cover a portion, but given the injuries and the condition of their car, the expenses will be significant. Keanu nodded. "Then I want to pay for whatever's left." The nurse hesitated, then smiled. "That's incredibly generous of you." Keanu shrugged. "They've been through enough. They don't need to worry about money, too." The nurse nodded and began typing. "I'll make the arrangements. We'll make sure they never know who covered it." The next morning, Keanu was packing up to leave when a nurse appeared at his door. "There's a family here who'd like to see you," she said with a knowing smile. Before he could respond, the father and mother entered the room, their children by their side. The father was still weak, his arm wrapped in a sling, but his eyes were clear and filled with gratitude. The mother, standing beside him, looked at Keanu like he was something otherworldly. "You're the man who saved us," she said, her voice breaking. "I don't even know how to thank you." Keanu shifted, feeling suddenly awkward. "I'm just glad you're okay." The father reached out his good arm, and Keanu shook his hand firmly. "We owe you everything." Keanu shook his head. "You don't owe me a thing." The mother wiped her eyes. "We want to do something to thank you. Please, at least let us cook you dinner." Keanu hesitated. He wasn't used to being the one receiving kindness. But when he looked down at the children, their faces hopeful, he found himself nodding. "I'd love that," he said. A week after the accident, Keanu Reeves found himself standing outside a modest suburban home, holding a bottle of wine. He had no idea why he was nervous. It wasn't a movie premiere, an interview, or a high-profile charity event. It was just dinner. And yet, something about this moment felt different, more important. The door swung open, revealing the father, Mark, now free of his hospital bandages. His face lit up with genuine joy. "You actually came." Keanu chuckled. "I said I would, didn't I?" The little girl, Lily, peeked from behind her father, squealing in delight before running up and hugging Keanu's legs. You came. Keanu laughed, ruffling her hair. "I wouldn't miss it." Mark stepped aside, motioning for him to enter. "Come in, man. You're family now." The inside of the house was warm and inviting. It wasn't extravagant, not the kind of place filled with designer furniture or high-end decorations. But it was real. Family photos lined the walls, toys were scattered in a cozy living room, and the scent of home-cooked food filled the air. Keanu felt something tighten in his chest. This was the kind of home he never really had growing up. The mother, Sarah, wiped her hands on a kitchen towel and rushed over. "Keanu, thank you again. For everything." He shook his head. "You don't have to keep thanking me." "Yes, we do," Mark said, handing him a beer. "You didn't just save our lives. You gave my kids their parents back." Lily climbed onto the couch beside Keanu, proudly holding up a drawing. "Look, I made this for you." Keanu took the paper and smiled. It was a crayon drawing of him in his Ferrari, with her family standing next to him, big smiles on their faces. At the top, in shaky little letters, it read, "Keanu, our hero." His heart clenched. He had never considered himself a hero. He was just a guy who couldn't stand by and do nothing. But to this family, to these kids, he was. "Wow," he said, genuinely touched. "This is amazing, Lily. Thank you." As Keanu drove through the quiet streets of the city, the glow of streetlights casting golden streaks across his windshield, his mind replayed the evening over and over. The warmth of the family, the way Lily had clung to him like he was a real-life superhero, the way Mark and Sarah had looked at him with gratitude that words couldn't fully express. The crayon drawing lay on the passenger seat, Lily's shaky letters spelling out the words, "Keanu, our hero." Keanu exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over his face. Hero. He had never thought of himself as one. He was just a man who had seen people in need and acted. No cameras, no scripts, no stunts, just instinct. Yet, as he reached into his pocket and pulled out the lucky coin the boy had given him, he felt something shift inside him. He had been given wealth, success, and fame, but none of that mattered in moments like these. This, helping people, making a real difference, this was what felt real. Gripping the coin tightly, he made a silent promise to himself. Whenever the world needed him, he would show up. Not as an actor, not as a celebrity, but as a person, as a man who cared. The next morning, Keanu sat in his kitchen, sipping a cup of black coffee, when his phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. He hesitated before answering. Hello. A familiar voice crackled through the line. Mr. Reeves? This is Mark. From last week. Keanu immediately sat up. Mark, how's everything? Mark let out a relieved chuckle. We're good, man. Sarah's doing better. The kids are adjusting. But listen, I don't want to take up too much of your time, but there's something I have to tell you. Keanu frowned slightly. What is it? Mark hesitated, then sighed. I lost my job a month ago. We were already struggling before the accident. And now, without the car, I don't know how I'm going to provide for them. Keanu's grip on his coffee mug tightened. Mark rushed to add, I'm not asking for anything. I just thought you should know, since you've already done so much for us. Keanu was silent for a moment. He knew what he had to do. Mark, he said calmly, I want you to meet me somewhere. An hour later, Keanu pulled up to a quiet parking lot outside a car dealership. Mark was already waiting, looking uncertain. Keanu stepped out of his car and gestured toward the building. Come on, let's get you a new ride. Mark's eyes widened. Wait, what? Keanu smiled. You need a car. You're getting a car. Mark shook his head, taking a step back. Keanu, no. You've already done more than I can ever repay. You don't have to repay me. Mark ran a hand through his hair. I can't accept that. It's too much. Keanu took a step forward, placing a firm hand on Mark's shoulder. Mark, listen to me. You have a family to take care of. You have kids who need their dad. Let me do this, so you can focus on them. Mark swallowed hard, his eyes shining with emotion. Keanu gave him a reassuring nod. Come on, man. Let's pick something safe and reliable. After an hour of browsing, Mark settled on a modest but sturdy SUV. The paperwork was signed, and Keanu paid for everything up front. No financing, no debt, just a clean slate. As Mark held the keys in his trembling hands, he turned to Keanu. I don't know how to thank you. You don't have to. Keanu smiled. Just be the best dad you can be. Mark exhaled sharply, then did something he never expected. He pulled Keanu into a tight hug. Keanu patted his back, smiling. Mark drove away in his new car. Keanu sat in his Ferrari for a long moment, staring down at the lucky coin in his hand. Lily had given it to him as a symbol of safety. Now, he realized, it was also a reminder of responsibility. He wasn't just an actor. He wasn't just a man who had once saved a family. He was someone who had the power to make a difference. And he would never stop doing that. Not now. Not ever.